The whole idea of this book was to share what has the World Bank done on a variety of tools, approaches, developments on knowledge management, but not necessarily only from the knowledge management perspective, but more how knowledge management should be seen by organizations, particularly global organizations that touch many countries, as a source of comparative advantage, as a source of effectiveness in providing clients much better services in the process, and giving a sense that no matter the complexity of the organization you work with, these communities of practice can help break silos across, not only to provide better services, but to catalyze cultural change and to transform organizations overall. No matter what the structure you have, actually committees of practice should be a fundamental part of the toolkit of the organization, and knowledge management should not be seen as a backroom function. It should be an integral part of the organization. And the challenge for multilateral banks and for many international NGOs and organizations is that you have this dual challenge of information overload. There's a massive amounts of information, both written and tacit, that is generated from their analytical work, from their operational work, from their research. And at the same time, they have really wicked development challenges, as Mesky was describing. These are not your traditional highway projects where the problem is more on engineering, maintenance solution, but it's really complex multi-sectoral ones. And the multiple crises that the world is facing, the multiple interlinked challenges that you're observing, require a new way of thinking and a new way of approaching. The old ways of the World Bank don't work. And at the same time, you have very complex matrix structures. And I know that the World Bank is complicated, but I use this slide from the Health and Human Services structure for the United States. And you can see all of the relations, units, departments in that process. Therefore, complex matrix structures are not very conducive to being able to tackle in an agile manner some of the wicked development problems that I was describing before. And therefore, the main message of the book is that knowledge management is at the core of comparative advantage of organizations. We are convinced that leaders on service provision, on intellectual leadership, on the combination of financial and analytical resources really can only be successful with a serious push for knowledge management. And President Banga, from what we can see from the outside, has realized that this is really part of the comparative advantage of the organization, and really has pushed forward to say, how do we actually get better at that? And has tasked Axel and the MD's office to really figure out how to push that in that direction. Now, I want to start the presentation with 4 myths that we try to dispel in the book. First is to say, look, everybody is so busy. Our work program is growing. The needs of our clients are just tremendous. And there's no time for knowledge management. We need to deliver. And our response is that the delivery without knowledge management will lead to suboptimal solutions. And actually, you are running slower because you don't have at the tip of your fingers the latest information, the latest experience, the community to share, compare, contrast what is it that you're offering. And therefore, like the good old African proverb, if you want to of us try to go alone, but actually if you want to go far, which is the mission of the World Bank, you really need to be together. This idea that the coordination through committees of practice is a waste of time is a myth. Second myth, and this happens a lot in the World Bank in large country offices or in large groups, where, look, we really know what the client wants, And the client really is not looking for experiences from abroad. We just need to figure out this project and how to get it in a way that they really want. That actually is a myth, because in reality, the real value added of the World Bank is on the ability to come and provide a set of offerings to clients to say, look, this is what the world has been working on in this challenge that you're facing. This has worked, this has not worked. This is some of the typical challenges that they're happening. This is the nuances of why certain things work and do not work. And therefore, it is through that dialogue that the solutions are generated in completely different ways. And therefore, that means that, look, I know what my client wants, leave me alone, I can deliver this faster. We believe that is also a myth. It is a myth that leads to suboptimal solutions. Many organizations, when they're talking about knowledge management, tend to say, look, this is an IT system. And we see this myth becoming even more prevalent with the advent of artificial intelligence and large language models, where organizations are saying, look, we just need to mine the information in our archives, and then that'll give us the solution. And we, in our book, we say, look, great to have those IT systems. It would be fantastic to be able to access all that information. But the real value, the real power of organizations comes from groups of people sharing, comparing notes, being able to think of solutions, being able to test different things in different environments, and very rapidly compare and contrast. We say that the World Bank is the best global laboratory of development solutions, that you are able to face and work with clients in the same challenge across different geographies and across different historical and institutional situations. And therefore, that laboratory allows you to compare and contrast in real time through these communities of practice to find practical solutions. The old way of doing a project, writing an ICR, telling the world about the ICR, somebody picking up those lessons and beginning the next cycle of projects, where things take 10 years, at the pace that the world is moving, is just absolutely unthinkable in that process. And so the third myth, we only need to fix the IT system. We believe that actually not, that actually the communities of practice are at the core of being more effective. And actually, even with IT systems that don't work, communities of practice can get around some of the weaknesses of those IT systems and resolve the issues in a more practical way. And finally, something that we believe you are facing today is the multiple objectives that the senior leadership of the World Bank has given you. You need to reduce by a third the project preparation time. You need to become more efficient as an organization before there's an increase of capital. You need to maintain quality in a multidimensional way, covering a wide range of expectations that the organization has given you. And there's no time for creativity. You can't have it all. And we believe that actually you can. It is possible to have it all. And you need to find those efficiencies and that higher quality and the space for creativity through those communities of practice, through those thematic groups in that direction. And therefore, the book presents a premise that, and a set of experiences showing how communities of practice can really become a source of comparative advantage for the organization, a source of better services, a source of that process. And one of the why communities is because we discovered that idea that the knowledge repository is at the headquarters of organizations is not necessarily true. The World Bank has traditionally set up knowledge systems that are of the type of a spoken hub, where you have global units that collect, curate, compare, and then send back to the country offices that information in a way as best practices, as things that the country offices need to do. We believed and we saw that actually knowledge resides in every corner of the organization. meaning the country offices are the generators of knowledge. It is through that experience of the day-to-day of implementation of programs and projects and policies that the lessons and the knowledge is generated. And the central units have also an important role in researching or horizon scanning and all of these important functions that they have. And therefore, the knowledge doesn't reside in one or the other. Everybody has that knowledge. And therefore, what we did in the global practice for social, urban, rural, and resilience, the GSUR, was actually to begin to say knowledge is everybody's business. This is not a function of the knowledge management team. This is not a function of what we had global leads, the technical leaders in the group. This is not a function of central units. Knowledge is everybody's business. And that is the core of the premise, and that is part of the cultural change that Phil will be talking about in that process. And our second premise was that there are any organization, as soon as you create a structure, defines silos right there, and you have a new set of silos today that are really with high walls across regions. You have silos between each of the vice presidencies that you have, SD versus infrastructure versus macroeconomics and the like, and you have silos between global units and the regions. So you have a multiplicity of silos that you're facing, and what committees of practice can do is that they have a really important role in breaking those knowledge silos, in really being able to move information freely, in being able to find those solutions through very rapid exchange of information, ideas, comparing, contrasting, and developing the process. Now, in the book, we give a lot of examples of the communities that we had in GSUR. And an important message that comes is that there's no one size that fits all. We had a very broad diversity of communities that actually evolved out of the current situation of the topic that we're working, that evolved out of the culture of members, that evolved out of, in a way, also what was the state of knowledge and understanding in the client's perspective. So we had from the transit-oriented development that was realized that actually there was a lot of knowledge out there, that there was a lot of partners doing interesting things, but that there was not a coordinated repository and a coordinated mechanism to very quickly get that information, process it, and compare and distribute. And therefore, the transit-oriented development became a community focused on quick aggregation and external partnerships to develop manuals, to develop toolkits, to develop a way of thinking about this process. The urban infrastructure, on the other side, saw their purpose as a platform to influence a global agenda. And very quickly, they connected to the G20 process. And the G20 had a working group on urban called the U20 with the 20 largest cities. And they decided that the best thing they could do was to influence the global agenda through a very structured connection of communities outside. So they didn't work inside as much. They didn't generate a lot. Their purpose was to influence the global agenda. Urbanscapes, that John was one of the leaders, actually picked a topic that nobody believed in, that there was no pipeline, that there was no portfolio, that people thought this is just landscape management and beautification of cities. What the hell is the World Bank doing that? And created the space for a completely new idea that became an integral part of the pipeline of many countries, and learn, compare, and contrast, and prove to country directors and to ministries of finance this makes sense for quality of life, economic development, poverty reduction. We had a committee of practice like the affordable housing, whose objective was to break barriers within the World Bank Group, where, and if you read the chapter, it's called the three tribes that didn't like each other. You had IFC, you had the trade and competitiveness with finance and banking, and then the core urban housing practice. And therefore, what this community did is that, look, We cannot have a client getting a solution depending on who picks up the phone in the World Bank Group. We need to have a consistent approach. We need to leverage our perspectives. We need to come together, and that's precisely what they did. So what you have, the main message that we want to communicate in this one is that there's not a one size that fits all. It depends on your topic, it depends on the internal culture of your members, it depends on what is the external environment for that topic, and everybody needs to choose. However, as Phil will describe later, we did give a sense of direction to each of the committees of practice to say, at the end of your journey, you need to become the center of excellence that is recognized globally as the place to come if you want to learn about this topic. And the journey to that ultimate goal was different from every committee of practice, but everybody knew this is where we're all trying to go. Let me pass it on to Phil to talk about how we supported that journey, how each of the committees of practice was forced to do a work plan, how does it help to have an impact evolution framework that allowed to guide that growth and that perspective. Phil?
Thanks, Ede. Thanks for that great overview. I just want to add a couple of points to what Ede said about knowledge management and its role within organizations like the World Bank. We focused in GSOR on what one might call the connecting side of knowledge management. Knowledge management involves functions that have to do with collecting and codifying and making available knowledge to staff and to clients. But it also has an important element which involves connecting those who are working on critical challenges and issues within the organization and then connecting them with clients. In particular, connecting is important for getting an understanding of and being able to communicate tacit knowledge that hasn't been codified, but really is a function of work on the ground, dealing with problems, coming up with solutions, and increasingly, that's the knowledge that clients are interested in. Much of the codified knowledge is available online these days. So clients want to actually be able to connect with someone who has faced the same kind of challenges that they are facing, who has dealt with some of the political challenges, who has dealt with institutional challenges. So a big part of the approach that was taken was to provide the mechanisms and space for that type of connecting. The other reason why connecting was important is that it is a way of ensuring interdisciplinarity, of ensuring that clients are able to draw on or be provided with or find solutions that cut across disciplines. And in part, this was a function of the necessity we faced when GSOR was established. It brought together a disparate set of professional disciplines and practices, from urban planning to disaster risk management to social development, where in the first two groups you had engineers, you had urban planners. In the latter, you had sociologists and anthropologists who had really never worked together or often even talked to each other. So part of the objective of the communities was to create a space to bring these types of groups together. We recognized early on that there were going to be different levels of development of the communities. Some were existing communities that went back to the early days of knowledge management in the bank with thematic groups. Others were newly established, and that it wouldn't be either fair or logical to hold each one to the same standard. So we worked with a external consultant to develop this idea of different stages of development of communities with different objectives in each case. And we developed an evaluation framework around that that said, okay, if you're a new community, we're not going to have as strong an expectations of you about operational impact, but we're going to judge you more by your ability to effectively create the community, to determine its objectives, to recruit members, and so forth. At the other extreme, a well-established community was very much expected to be able to have impact in terms of affecting operations or even getting involved with the development and execution of operations. The other beauty of the evaluation framework was that the communities themselves selected the measures or the indicators by which they were going to be judged. There was a menu, if you will, of measures for each type or level of community, and they themselves would select those, would gather the information, and that's what was used for assessment. But a common principle throughout, which I think was very important in terms of linking the communities to the day-to-day business of the bank, was that ultimately they had to have operational impact. Knowledge sharing simply for the sake of knowledge sharing wasn't sufficient justification for devoting resources. Whether that operational impact was, as I said earlier, getting directly involved with projects or at other stages in the project cycle. For example, some of the KSBs took on the role of crowdsourcing peer reviews. So it would give an opportunity for a larger number of staff to be involved in peer reviews, and for junior staff who might not otherwise be invited to a peer review process. Others took on the role of operational help desks. The affordable housing community, for example, provided a platform where any project TTL was able to ask for experiences, questions, very specific things such as, the mechanism for housing finance, and the community would quickly respond. Next slide, Eddie. One of the, I think, important lessons of our experience and our journey with the KSBs was we took a gardening approach. And extending this metaphor, this is in contrast to a let 1,000 flowers bloom approach. So we did initially have an open call for proposals, bottom-up approach to defining communities. But then we carefully assessed them, and like a gardener, good gardener, those that were not performing as well as been expected were either weeded out or put aside to create space for those that were doing well to either expand or to create space for new communities to be established. So a very open-ended approach to identifying and establishing communities, but then holding them to standards and being very proactive in terms of weeding out, if you will, those that weren't effective in order to make best use of resources. Next slide. In addition to the communities themselves, one of the other aspects of the GSOR journey that we cover in the book is the several instruments and platforms that either took advantage of or were supportive of the whole knowledge ecosystem that the KSBs were the center of. One of these was the art of knowledge exchange methodology for results-focused knowledge exchange. And knowledge exchange here, we're talking about whether it's peer-to-peer among staff or whether it's peer-to-peer among clients. The experience, and this came out of, in fact, the development of the South-South Knowledge Exchange Trust Fund, which was established with the impetus from Ngozi when she was MD. One of the lessons of that trust fund was that good design was really a critical aspect of whether or not knowledge exchanges would be effective. And a very good methodology was developed by WBI, which GSOR picked up on. And we customized a guidebook on knowledge exchange, replacing all of the cases with cases from the social, urban, and resilience families, and trained more than a quarter of GSOR staff on this methodology. And we saw very quickly how it resulted in much better designed knowledge exchanges and ones that were able to be measured. Much of the methodology was then utilized within the Tokyo Development Learning Center. Again, an existing platform which GSOR was able to take over and completely transform. In particular, having it become a platform for a unique and innovative modality for knowledge exchange, which we call technical deep dives, which assess move from having single country knowledge exchange to multi-country, involving quite a bit of co-creation of solutions, but also bringing together delegations of staff, bank TTLs in a common learning environment. And this proved to be a really powerful instrument and one that was utilized elsewhere within GSOR, not only in the Tokyo Development Learning Center. Another important lesson from the South-South Exchange Facility was that the assumption that clients would always have the capacity to effectively communicate their solutions and lessons to others was perhaps an over-ambitious assumption. So in many knowledge exchanges, we were finding that the supply side, in other words, the knowledge providers, were technical people, that they hadn't really codified or documented their experience. To give an early example, the Indonesia Disaster Risk Management Agency was an agency which had the experiences probably from a wider range of natural disasters than any country in the world. Indonesia having everything from earthquakes to tsunamis to volcanic activity to flooding. But the staff of that agency were all engineers or planners. They didn't have the experience of communication. They hadn't documented what they were doing from one disaster to another. They were running all the time to deal with a disaster. So one of the things that we did was to work with them to essentially document what they were doing to create a culture of knowledge and, in a sense, have them become a knowledge hub. Next slide, Eddie. A big part of the whole process was one of culture change. Going back to Eddie's point about knowledge being everyone's business, we needed to create a sense of knowledge citizenry, of people, rather than feeling that I don't have time to share that it's part of your job to share and it's part of your job to learn. And this was done in large measure through events, which served as platforms to introduce some fun and interesting modalities for knowledge sharing and learning. It drew on the experience of the old SD network in 2014, just before the reorganization, when they organized their final SD forum and really sort of broke the mold in terms of the modalities, moving away from very traditional PowerPoint heavy approaches to much smaller modalities that involved quick types of communications, shifting around, gamification, and the like. And we picked up on these in GSOR and used them as the mechanism. In our first GSOR-wide forum, we recognized that the need was really much more about creating community. And we didn't worry so much about the content, but rather created space for people in country offices around the world in different families, from social to urban to DRM, who had often never even met each other, to have space to learn together in fun ways. That then evolved into later large events where the communities had become stronger and they took on the role of creating the content. But again, following modalities that were very clear in the sense of avoiding a lot of talking heads, rather using storytelling and related mechanisms. One other thing I want to say about the communities before I turn back to Ede was a key lesson was the importance of having professional knowledge management staff to play a catalytic or a facilitating role within the communities. The bank had already done some work and had determined that community managers played an important role and had a training program for them. In the early first year of our communities, we let each community sort of hire someone to be their community manager. And most of them would hire a content expert to supplement their technical staff. But we realized that having people who had been trained as community managers was an essential role, and we centralized that process, and it proved to be very effective. And I think proof of that was that when the bank group would have its annual community manager awards during the time that GSOR was operating, we sort of swept the Oscars, if you will, in terms of our community managers being recognized. So let me turn back over to Ede to talk about the rest of the book.
Thank you, Phil. And in the book, we also cover other tools, approaches, and experiences beyond GSOR that we really like. So, for example, the IFC at the time had a really nice approach to knowledge management and had a series of tools where, for example, each individual had performance indicators related to knowledge management, the score. They had an annual awards for knowledge sharing, the Nobel Awards. They had a very structured campaign once a year in November to get everybody to write their tacit knowledge in a very structured manner. So it was the November campaign. And then they had the knowledge flash to be able to have new methodologies to share those bits of information that were really important on specific client engagements. In the book, we talk about the water global practice that had what we believe was the best help desk, and we actually GISUR didn't have a help desk, and we documented that in the book. We talk about the archives as a really important tool for the World Bank Group to document its history, and we talk about the Open Learning Campus that we leverage and work with, but actually is one of the most structured ways to share that knowledge. Finally, we had a chapter on evaluation. Because in the end, we can tell good stories, but did it actually really work? And IG had a couple of evaluations on knowledge flows and collaboration and learning. And we were very pleased that with the discipline that they brought to the process, they were able to show that our communities of practice were leading to GISUR being one of the most collaborative GPs, both in terms of knowledge, but in terms of also on practices and programs and projects. So both indicators were able to say really this approach on communities of practice has led to important results on the operational side, and many of the practices that we had were picked up in the evaluation as examples of what large organizations should be doing. I'll conclude with a couple of points that these results could not have been achieved without a very dedicated focus of the GISUR leadership on supporting communities of practice. The managers had an important role in encouraging the teams to say, this is an important thing of what we do. You are all knowledge citizens. It is your responsibility to engage with these communities to give and receive. In the concept notes and the decision meetings, there was always a question on, look, what kind of knowledge are you bringing from other regions and other countries? There was a structured engagement where managers were really being part of these communities. The management team included the global leads as an integral part of the management team, and therefore it sent the signal to the entire global practice of about 700 staff and about 1,000 consultants in 90 countries. Knowledge is as important as management. So all of those signals combined with the platforms and the tools that Phil was describing was an important part of getting the results that we wanted to achieve. With that, thank you very much. I hope that this quick overview of what is a book of several hundred pages gives you a sense of what we talk about, and we're happy to have now a conversation and answer your questions, and I know that you have two commentators